Human civilizations is about building, growing, and shaping the world. But as we transform our environment, we often forget we are also a product of it. Over time, human and other living beings have to evolve in response to the nature opportunities and limits. Today, in the midst of climate change and social inequalities, it's time to ask, is the way we are living truly sustainable? And before diving into our topic, let's take a moment to understand the root of the word sustain. At its core, it means the ability to persist over time with an ongoing mentally and physically support. To visualize this, think of a forest ecosystems. It doesn't survive on the tree alone. It depends on the soil, water, sunlight, and the delicate balance between plants, animals, and microbes. Each element plays a role supporting the whole ecosystems. When one system is disturbed, the entire system feels the impact. Therefore, the true essence of sustainability refers to the capacity of being to endure, both nurturing and being nurtured through its relationship with the environment. Therefore, in the lens of sustainable economic development, we examine how goods are produced, marketed, delivered, and ultimately wasted through the production process, all in the effort just to meet the human needs. Mainly, it focuses on calling for new levels of efficiencies, producing more with fewer resources, and generating less waste. Such economic systems must account for both the flow of natural and environmental resources into the production process, and the return flow of the waste back into the natural environment. After all, the quality of environment directly affects the standard of living in any society. In the case of Malaysia, the country has pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 under the Paris Climate Agreement. To support this commitment, Malaysia has introduced two key policy frameworks. The first is the National Energy Transition Roadmap, NETR, which focuses on shifting sectors away from fossil fuels and promoting sustainable energy sources such as renewable energy, hydrogen, and green mobility. This roadmap aims to tackle climate change, strengthen energy security, and ensure long-term sustainability. The second is the New Industrial Master Plan, NIMP 2030. This built around four key goals. First is transitions to sustainable practices. Second is shifting renewable energy and clean energy. Third is catalyzing green growth areas. And lastly, advancing green infrastructures. While distinct in focus, both policies share a common goal, which are to steer Malaysia towards a low-carbon sustainable future by transforming its energy and industrial sectors. With such bold and promising sustainability goals in place, it raises a critical question. Is Malaysia truly making progress, especially when faces the current state of climate challenges today? I would say I'm not convinced. Despite the ambitious nature of the NETR and NIMP 2030, there are three major issues that limit the effectiveness in Malaysia's current context. Firstly, there's a clear unalignment between these plans and Malaysia's present climatic realities, particularly the recurring floods crisis happening across major states. To date, over R1 billion has already been spent solely on flood rescue operations. These floods are not only causing environmental and societal concerns, they are also severely impacting our economic activity, especially in the case of Port Klang, one of our country's key logistic hubs. The floodwater have made the delivery routes inaccessible, preventing logistics staff from reporting to work and also congesting our transportations of goods to and from the port. Second, there is also an imbalance of how these climate-related funds are being distributed in Malaysia policies. For example, the NETR estimates a whopping 1.3 trillion ringgit is needed to transition Malaysia into a green economy that focus on electrifications. But this raises a critical concerns. Generating enough electric to power the entire nation still requires massive power plants. And if we continue relying on fossil fuel to generate that electricity, we aren't actually reducing emissions. We are simply just relocating them. Thirdly, the policy also lack of a local contextualizations. While both policies are visionary, the current plans fall short in addressing Malaysia's unique needs and infrastructure limitations. The government has yet to provide clarity on how these trillion ringgit transitions will be financed, and the financial breakdown remains vague. And as a plan without finance strategy, it will face serious implementation challenges. With that in mind, let's look at how South Korea government has approached its green growth strategy. Since the 1960s, South Korea has made its remarkable progress in environmental policies, and over the years, its policies has evolved significantly, moving from top-down reactive approach to a more participatory models that encourage citizen engagement and strong commitment from local government. This shift have allowed public to play a more proactive and cooperative role in creating a cleaner and healthier environment. Importantly, South Korea has also transitioned from a model of weak sustainability, where efforts merely delay environmental collapse, to a strong sustainable models that actively works to prevent it. This approach is rooted in the belief that ecological limits are non-negotiable. As such, economic and social system must redesign to function within the Earth carrying capacity. To ensure accountability, South Korea didn't stop at planning. They enacted a legal framework to support climate change adaptations and track progress. In 2010, they introduced a Framework Act on Low Carbon and Green Growth, a law that provides mechanisms to monitor, evaluate, and continuously improve their sustainability policies. After establishing the regulations, they also introduced a foundational policy called the Emissions Target Management Scheme, TMS. This serves as a stepping stone towards eventual implementations of Emissions Trading Scheme, EMS, which is a more advanced carbon offset mechanism. Given the complexity and sensitivity of carbon market, South Korea opted a more gradual and controlled approach. Through the TMS, the government were able to lay the groundwork for industry to adapt, slowly transitioning into the ETS framework while working towards national energy reduction targets. Today, let's take a closer look how the TMS was implemented and how it has been such a critical part of South Korea's journey towards building a robust carbon market. So now let's look into the industrial sector of TMS. This industrial greenhouse gas and energy target management scheme is implemented in 2010, specifically targeted at the reductions of emissions and energy use within the South Korea industrial sector. This policy is directed at the large-scale business facilities. They are responsible over 60% of the country's total emission. And during that time, there were about 466 entities registered under this scheme. They are mainly from the high-emitting industry, such as the petrochemicals, semiconductors, electronics, and cements. These businesses are each assigned to an annual target for both emission reductions and energy savings. And once the targets are determined using the grandfathering methods, meaning that each company allowance is based on its emissions in the selected baseline year. And once the targets are set, companies must submit their implementation plan outlining how they intend to meet their goals. And these plans will be reviewed by the relevant ministries, mainly the MOE, which is the Ministry of Environment. And once these mitigations activities are carried out, companies must submit the completions and emissions account, which are verified by the independent third party before submitted to the head of ministry. Next, all these entities must go through the MRV process, which stands for Monitoring, Reporting and Verifications. This is to ensure all reported emissions reductions are accurate and achieved in accordance with the government guidelines. And to further support effective implementations of this industrial TMS, the South Korea government offer institutional and financial incentives. For example, they provide a low interest loan for companies to invest in energy efficient technology. Additionally, they grant financial support for consulting services such as conducting on-site diagnosis to help businesses identify the best mitigation strategy. However, the government also enforced this scheme with strict penalties. Entities that fail to submit required reports or meet their target's allowance can fines amounting to millions of won. Right, let's turn our attention now to the public sector of TMS. This shares the same core objective as the industrial TMS, namely reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and the energy consumptions. However, this branch focuses specifically on the public institutions. This will include the Central Administrative Agency, local government, state-owned enterprise, and the national and private universities. The government recognized that placing public sector at the forefront of mitigations was critical. By leading by example, public institutions could set high standards for both industry and individual households to follow. This approach reflects that the government will intend to emphasize shared responsibilities in these transitions towards a low-carbon society. And with this in mind, the government set an ambitious goal. They will aim to reduce greenhouse emissions from public sector operations by 20% by the year of 2015. To wrap up, both the industrial and public sector under TMS have shown successful outcomes. In the industrial sectors, 434 entities achieved a total reductions of 21.3 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's a 2.7 times higher than the government initial targets of 8 million tons in 2012. Over 90% of the participants have successfully met their targets, and initially there were concerns that companies would need more time to adapt, but this result proved that they were able to meet the challenge in a cost-effective way. And by the end of 2014, no penalties were issued to any entities. This wasn't because of the leniency, but rather the government approach were to support but not to punish. They focus on helping companies to build strong technical and infrastructure capacities for the MRV, which is essential to transitions to the ETS, which is the emissions trading schemes. On the other hand, in the public sectors, there were 703 institutions who submitted the reports and managed to reduce 400,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, also surpassing the MOE targets of 8%. Every type of institution showed improvement from the previous year, and we found out that the biggest driver of change was the behavioral adjustments, making up 62.7% of the reductions by cutting out AC use and limiting the elevator use, followed by the facility improvements of 6.9%. This shows that most public institutions prefer low-cost actions over expensive upgrades. So finally, what impact TMS have made to the South Korean economy? At its core, this policy is designed to help business transition smoothly into low-carbon operations while minimizing potential negative impacts. And it ultimately worked. The national emissions peak in 2014 began to decline from 2015. This marks the beginning of decoupling emissions from economic growth, which is also a crucial step for sustainable development. Now let's get to the cost. The annual net cost to meet the reduction target was estimated at US 1.6 billion per year, adding up to 14 billion by 2020. And there was a small projected decline in GDP around 0.5% by 2020 compared to 2011. However, this roadmap showed that allocating carbon-related fiscal budgets to R&D would generate economic surplus in the midterms, thanks to the technological advancements and innovations. When we reflect on Malaysia's current NETR policies, it is clear that we are still lack of the foundations that are needed for these meaningful energy transitions. In the implementation stage, without the strong public support and a localized plan, this plan is not feasible. As the truth is, the society is still facing real struggles. The recurring floods continue to disrupt life, shutting down businesses, and even throwing our supply chain into chaos. We can imagine when the ground beneath us isn't stable, how can we build something on top of it that is long lasting? Let alone meet extra emission reduction targets? That's why we must start small. Begin at the level where local businesses currently stands, provide them with a safe and resilient space to operate, and once these businesses have the stability, government can begin to raise standards, guiding businesses to drive towards a more cleaner energy options and adopting more sustainable practices. At the same time, the economy also opens up more employment opportunities, such as the green jobs. For example, offering jobs just like expanding the capacity of the drainage systems in urban areas and also integrating landscapes towards a more nature-based solutions to reduce the flood risk. These actions don't just fight climate change, they also restore public confidence on towards the government's initiative. And once all these foundations are in place, we shall begin to take a bolder steps, just like South Korea did with its target management schemes, TMS. Even if their transitions doesn't bring economic gains, it at least it lays the groundwork for long-term resilience. Because if we don't act now, we'll keep losing to climate change, spending more and more just to repair the damage. But if we plan ahead and we care enough to build a societal adaptations foundations, we will give everyone in the nations an opportunities. Instead of reacting, we need to act now with a detailed action plan that can face the growing uncertainty of the climate change. Thank you.